everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, August 22nd, 2024. I've got a couple of corkers for you today. First, let's take care of the housekeeping. We do have a vid chat tomorrow afternoon, Friday afternoon, August 23rd at 2 o'clock U.S. Central Time in the afternoon. They are predicting some overnight storms. However, I'm going to go ahead with the vid chat because it sounds like they're telling us that the storms will be out by the time we have our vid chat. Now, please remember what the storms in my part of the country mean. They can mean power outages. So if I'm not there in the chat room by, let's say, 2:30 tomorrow afternoon, then chances are my power went out. But I don't think it will. So I'm going to go ahead with the scheduled vid chat tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Now, I had some real difficulty today trying to decide what to talk about. We had the crazy business of a water spout. If there are those of you who don't know what a water spout is, it's basically a tornado over water. And yes, they do get tornadoes in Europe, folks. But there was a water spout apparently off the coast of Sicily that actually slammed into a yacht and capsized it. And there's all sorts of speculation out there right now because some of the people on board the yacht were, of course, a bunch of billionaire busybodies. So I thought I was going to do the story about that, and then the story came out that the Ukrainian Rada, which is their parliament, had passed a law forbidding the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, outlawing it, essentially. And I really wanted to talk about that, but it gets into so much ecclesiastical politics and recent history, I thought it would be too long of a story to do in a news and views. I might actually blog about it. The Ukrainian response is not without its background and reasons in history, although again I do think that in the case of the current Ukrainian government you're also dealing with hysteria and a significant amount of anti-Christian, and I would also aver anti-Orthodox sentiment and feeling. But I don't want to talk about any of that because just as I was getting ready to do the news and views, I received two very interesting stories, one from EG and another from EE. And I want to run with both of these stories. They're completely unrelated to each other except in that they both highlight in a very graphic, dramatic way the utter insanity and criminality and total lack of any sort of traditional morality that is now gripping the governments of the West. The old adage is you can vote them in, but you can't vote them out. You have to shoot them out. Well, it's given the craziness of these people, you have to wonder exactly if it's not coming down to that. But anyway, this story appeared. These are both at Zero Hedge. And I want you to listen to this first story. The story is titled Russia Summons US Envoy Over Presence of American Mercenaries, CNN Crew in Kursk Region. And I'm going to cite a few paragraphs from the beginning of this article and then a few at the very end. So here we go. Quote, via Fox News, quote, the Foreign Ministry in the meeting with the U.S. Embassy Chief of Mission, Stephanie Holmes, issued strong protest in, quote, connection to the provocative actions of American reporters who illegally entered the Kursk region to produce propaganda for covering up the crimes of the Kiev regime, unquote. The statement further said that national law enforcement authorities plan to, quote, carry out the necessary investigative measures, unquote, examining the American journalist's work. Now, reading between the lines a bit, what Russia's telling the American envoy, is we intend to treat your journalists as spies because they are on Russian territory without permission of Russia, and they are serving a propaganda purpose, so far as Russia is concerned, in their narrative reporting in favor of the Kiev regime. That's exactly what they're telling us. And, whether we like it or not, when the Russians say things like this, you'd better pay attention. Okay? But the really interesting thing that is being reported about this meeting, and which is being reported in this article, is right at the very end. I want you to listen very carefully to this. Quote, "But among the more interesting charges aimed at Holmes from the Russian Foreign Ministry centers on the alleged presence of U.S. military contractors assisting the Kursk invasion. The ministry pointed to, quote, evidence that has emerged of the participation of American private military companies on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces during the offensive into Russia," unquote. While not naming specific companies or firms, Russian state sources have flagged a posting by the American military lifestyle brand Forward Observations Group. The organization recently posted photos of alleged U.S. mercenaries on Instagram, apparently on the Kursk battlefield, with a caption that reads, "The boys in Kursk," unquote. Now, folks, I'm not at all surprised to learn that the covert American presence in the Ukrainian theater of operations is being led by these corporate mercenary forces, and we all know their names. What is interesting to me, and which I think partially explains the apparent patience and slowness of the Russian response in Kursk, which the Western media and propaganda is getting completely wrong. It is not about Russian ineffectiveness or weakness at all. We just had, with this message, a taste of what is confronting the Russians, and my suspicion is the delay is how they're going to respond. They're taking full stock of the corporations involved as covert fronts for American policy in the Ukraine. And I suspect that part of this is due to the fact that the Russians are, first of all, going to want to examine the status of these corporations in law, and particularly in American law and international law. And then secondly, they're going to, by even mentioning the corporate presence and corporate mercenaries in their address to the American envoy, what the Russians are serving notice is, if you are a corporation involved in this activity, you are involved in an act of war and will be treated accordingly. So in other words, I think, again, notice has just been served that the horizontal escalation that the Russians keep warning about are going to include targeting these corporations. Now, what does that mean? That means that the corporations can be targeted for economic and financial warfare. They can be targeted for cyber warfare. And most of all, they can be targeted for decapitation strikes. Now, what that means in military terms, of course, is attacks on the leadership and communications infrastructure of an opposing force to render the decision-making capability of that opposing force inoperable to the extent that you can. That's what it means. So this is very, very serious what the Russians just did, because they just served notice that we know that these corporate fronts are operating in the Ukraine, and now we're letting you know that we know, and by us letting you know that we know, we are telling you that you're on the target list. That's what they just did. So it will be interesting over the next few weeks and months to see if this expands. We already know that there have been quote-unquote accidents at munitions plants, both in the United Kingdom and in Germany. And I strongly suspect, in the United Kingdom's case, the United Kingdom came right out and said that, yeah, it was suspected Russian sabotage. Well, if this is the case, then you can expect similar incidents to ratchet up over the next few weeks and months, and perhaps, God perish the thought, over the next few years. As I've been trying to warn, the Russians are just getting started with their horizontal escalation. And folks, they are extremely patient. Do not misinterpret Russian patience and methodical response as weakness. That is not what it is. Now, I want to turn to the second story that just has me absolutely, utterly gobsmacked at how completely, and I would aver, criminally insane the leadership of the West has become. And when I read this story, the first thing that I thought was, well, this is where the ultimate aim of this so-called policy is going to go. And sure enough, within the body of the article, as I kept reading, the author of the article came right out and confirmed what I just thought. These people are nuts. So the article is titled, I want you to listen very carefully. The article is titled, Top Biden-Harris Official Calls for Queering Nuclear Weapons, unquote. And I want to read a few paragraphs from the very beginning of this article, and then one paragraph from the end of it. Quote, and by the way, this story ran just yesterday. Quote, a recent Biden-Harris administration Department of Energy high-level hire is attracting controversy as well as appropriate widespread mockery for publishing formal articles calling for, quote, the queering of nuclear weapons, unquote. This is almost word for word an actual title of one of her papers. Snea Nair was named Special Assistant to the National Nuclear Security Administration less than a year ago, and since then, several of her recent academic papers have been unearthed, focusing on, quote, the relationship between queerness and nuclear policy, unquote, as a substantive issue. Below is one such paper co-authored by Nair, featured at the prominent publication Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. The article, which is one of several such examples authored by her, claims that, quote, discrimination against queer people can undermine nuclear security and increase nuclear risk, unquote. Quote, equity and inclusion for queer people is not just a box-ticking exercise in ethics and social justice. It is also essential for creating an effective nuclear policy, unquote, Nair continues. Now, folks, when I read that, and before I read any further, the thought immediately occurred to me, what these people want to do is get the whole alphabet soup, LGBTQXY, that whole alphabet soup of gender dysphoric nonsense in control of nuclear weapons. So that those weapons, please hear me, I know this sounds crazy, so that those weapons can be turned against anybody adhering to or upholding or arguing for any sort of traditional culture or virtue or cosmology or what have you. That's what I thought. And I thought, no, Farrell, that you're just crazy. You're going too extreme. That's not what is being talked about here. They just kind of want to paint a rainbow flag on your local hydrogen bomb storage shelter. But no, I want you to listen very carefully now to the paragraphs that follow in this article. Quote, and supposedly the U.S. homeland faces greater nuclear risk, pardon me, if there is exclusion and unfair treatment under the aegis of supposed white male patriarchy. Below are some actual segments taken from this top Biden official's work, which includes interesting buzzwords like a, quote, male-dominated, unquote, quote, nuclear priesthood, unquote. So in other words, they want women's ordination in the nuclear priesthood. Okay? So here we go. Here are the quotations. Quote, exclusion and unfair treatment of queer individuals and other minorities by a homogeneous cis heteronormative community of practitioners also creates vulnerabilities in nuclear decision making. So they're vulnerable because they have, according to this lady, no control over the policy of the use of nuclear weapons. That's what she just said. Continuing, quote, listen carefully, folks. If you thought my speculation was madness, here it is, quote, including a wider range of perspectives in nuclear decision-making creates a more comprehensive definition of who or what constitutes a threat to nuclear security. In other words, if you're traditionalist Russia or China or India or Pakistan, you are a nuclear threat to their nuclear security. That's what she just said. Continuing with the quotation, quote, an example of this is the threat posed by some white supremacist groups with plans to acquire nuclear weapons or material which can go undetected when a white majority workforce does not perceive these groups and their ideological motivation as a relevant threat to their nuclear security mission, unquote. So in other words, and there's more. I'll link the article for you. You can read this woman's insanity. So in other words, they want nuclear weapons in the hands of, quote unquote, the queer community or the cis heteronormative or whatever stupid word that these idiots come up. That's what they want. They want to put nuclear weapons in the hands of these policymakers so they can retaliate against so-called white supremacist groups like Pakistan or India, you know, these traditional societies that have nuclear weapons. Folks, this is utter madness. These people are sick. And I make no bones about that. I'm speechless and flabbergasted that anybody would think these people are sane. They are criminally insane. And please note, there is no, in the quotations I just read you, and within the quotations that are cited in this article from this woman, there is no expression or even attempt to communicate that she's even aware of the dangers of the use of nuclear weapons to anybody. Now, right towards the end of the article, we find out who the dastard, who the skunk in the woodpile, who the rattlesnake in the woodpile is. Quote, meanwhile, Fox News has also noted her pre-administration position and funding. Before she joined the administration, she worked for the Stimson Institute, which has received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Soros Open Society foundations and millions from the Embassy of the State of Qatar over the years. Fox Digital News review of their funding sources revealed, I should say. So there you have it, folks. In a nutshell, they want to turn influence and control of nuclear weapons over to people who can't even tell what bathroom to use or what a woman is. That's what they want to do. So I'll leave it there for today. I think that's sufficient to leave everybody's jaws on the floor. Go read the articles. If you think I'm wrong, that I'm making much ado about nothing, go ahead and lambaste me, but that's my read on it. So we'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Don't forget the vid chat tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Don't forget we do have a possibility of overnight storms, possibility of power going out, and so on. So if that happens, then probably I won't reschedule the vid chat. I'll wait till September, and you'll have to repost tomorrow's comments and questions for that other vid chat. But I don't think that's going to happen. We should be able to go ahead with the vid chat as scheduled tomorrow afternoon. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.